Welcome back, Natural Resources. You may notice that the next part of your course pack is not forest resources management and that it is looking at soils and water and things like that. However, if you have been outside lately, you notice that the temperature is getting a little bit cooler and we're starting to see a lot of debris on the ground from trees. And so I do want to talk about forestry before the trees lose all their leaves because I do think that that makes forestry identification a little bit easier. Yes, you can identify certain trees by bark, but it does make it much more difficult. So, in order to be able to do some forestry identification during this unit, I want to go ahead and move forward a little bit past the soils in the water and the wildlife, and we're going to go ahead and do forestry now, and we'll come back to those things later. So, as far as forestry and understanding the role of forestry and the role of forestry products, first of all, we have to kind of think about what an actual forest is and where some of our forests are located. So, when we're looking at forest, we are looking at a community mixture of trees and shrubs and plants and animals. Most of the time, when we think about forest, we just think about the trees because that's what we see most of. But forest is an entire basically like an ecosystem of different things that are living within that forest, whether it be the wildlife or whether streams may be going through the forest or different plants or animals or shrubs or whatever. So, because of that, that's what makes um, forestry kind of a difficult issue right now. As I'm recording this, we're looking at having lots and lots of wildfires out in the western part of the United States. And a lot of it has to do with forest management type of issues because there are things that we can do to help prevent such massive wildfires, but those are things that are not necessarily being done right now. And so we need to look at some forest management practices as we're going throughout this particular unit. So, in the United States, the production of forests has increased, even though the acreage has not risen. So basically, what that tells us is that we are harvesting trees younger and we are putting more trees into our forest. So, whenever we're looking at the idea of doing forestry, there are a lot of forests that are actually going to be hand seeded rather than natural seeding, so that we know exactly how many trees are going into a particular forest and we can put fast growing species in those forests so that they can be harvested at a younger age. So we're looking at forests. It is a big industry in the United States, even though when we look out at them, we typically are just seeing trees. In the early days of our country, there were benefits and there were issues with forest. They were an asset, absolutely, because they produced wood and it was exported. It was used for building purposes. There was wildlife and game that actually lived in those forests, and so that provided a source of food. But it became a problem because there was nowhere to actually grow crops. And so in order for the early settlers to be able to grow crops, they had to remove some of the forest and turn it into pasture land in order to be able to do that. So forests in the early days of our country were kind of a necessary, I don't want to say a necessary evil, but because they were good, but they were an issue to settlers as well because they had to figure out how to manage what was in the forest, but they also had to get rid of some of it in order to be able to have pasture land to grow the crops that they needed. So generally, the plain states, so out in Kansas and Oklahoma and places like that. They were, and parts of the Southwest and the West were too dry to actually have big forests, and so that's why a lot of your pasture land, ranch type land, livestock growth, cattle growth, huge ranches are situated in the middle part of the United States, just because there weren't as many forests because it just did not support the dry climate did not support the forests that you see, especially in places like the Pacific Northwest. So um, the plain states are the plain states because they really just couldn't support a whole lot of trees. And so that's why you have a lot of the cropland that you have in the middle part of the United States, because instead of being able to remove the trees to plant crops, they just planted the crops where it was readily available. So um, a lot of the way that we do things agriculturally in this country has to do with climate, and forests are a big part of that. So there are different regions of forest in the United States, and the type of soil that's there, which we actually would talk about a little bit later on. We'll talk about different types of soil, the climate, what the weather's like as far as heat and cool and rain and stuff like that. All of that affect the type of trees that will grow in certain areas. You've got the West Coast region, you've got the Western region, the Central Hardwood region, tropical, that's going to be in areas where kind of like the Florida areas and things like that. And then you've got the northern region and the southern region, and you can see some of the different regions here in this map. All of these different parts of the United States are going to grow different types of trees based on what the climate is like. Some of our biggest and best forestry that we have in the United States is actually up here in the Pacific Northwest region. So some of our largest and oldest trees are actually grown in that particular area. And then you move down into this Pacific region, kind of the California area and even Western Nevada, you're looking at things like that's where your big redwoods are. Those trees that are so big that you can actually build roads through them. Um, Over in our part of the world, you're looking at a lot of pines. Yes, there are some hardwoods, but mostly what you see in North Carolina are going to be pine trees. But it is a good region to be able to grow Christmas trees. So forestry in a different way is big in North Carolina, because not only are we, rich in pine, but we also are rich in the ability to have Christmas trees as well. So a couple things that forests help to do. It helps to make it cooler. We're just coming off of a pretty hot summer, and if you're like me, this time of year, whenever the weather starts to cool down a little bit, you appreciate the drier air, the little bit cooler air. But even in the summer when it's hot, if you're to go into a forest, it's going to be much cooler because you've got the canopy of the trees that's actually helping to shade and protect you. So when we're looking at a forest, it can be a protective type of place, and going into a forest can be cool. The transpiration by the trees, which is basically the way that they are losing water vapor, it helps to cool the air around it. And this says as much as 8 degrees Fahrenheit. And, I've never actually measured it whenever I'm going down into the woods, but it for sure does make a big difference whenever you're outside baking in the sun versus in a nice, cool, wooded area. Forests are also going to do things like they're going to serve as windbreaks. They're going to help with keeping wind off of an area, which also helps with erosion type of issues. They also help to quiet noise. At our house, we have a set of woods in between us and neighbors, and it does help to keep it a little bit quieter so that we're not hearing all the noise from the neighborhood next door to us. They help to release oxygen into the air. They're going to help to conserve soil and water because those roots are going to be anchoring they're anchored into the ground, and they're going to be keeping the soil and the water in the ground. They're going to provide homes for wildlife. Typically you don't see a whole lot of wildlife just roaming around residential areas, and that's because that's not normal for them. Normally you're going to see wildlife in wooded areas because that's what they feel comfortable doing. That's their habitat. And they also are going to they're going to provide a place where it's just nice and peaceful and calm. It's a nice place to provide rest for somebody and just solitude. And there'll be times during this course where we actually just go out into the woods to observe some of the things that we see. We'll be going down to the creek area and looking to see what kind of wildlife and insects and things that we actually see down in the woods. And it is very stress relieving. So the forests are going to help to be able to provide that little respite from the world as well. There are a lot of forest products, and this doesn't even begin to list the just massive number of products that you actually get from forestry type products. Most obvious, wood. We're going to build with wood. We're going to make things with wood. It can be converted into other products though. Paper, pretty obvious one. We use a lot of paper. Charcoal. Rayon is a type of material. Cellulose is typically going to be used almost as a filler in things. So a lot of times you'll have cellulose in things kind of used as a filler. All different kinds of stuff. Shatterproof glass, you wouldn't think that that would be a forestry product. Imitation vanilla. So if you go and you purchase pure vanilla from the grocery store, then yes, you are getting the pure vanilla from the vanilla bean. But imitation vanilla can actually be created from forestry products. It's much cheaper. Doesn't have the same vanilla flavor, but it will get you by in a pinch. And if you're looking for a cheaper alternative to the pure vanilla, so lots of different products are available, and our forest help to provide those things. So, as you are thinking about the things that forests help to provide, go out in the woods and just kind of look around you and think about how if we didn't have those forests, there'd be so many things that we did not have. So next time, we're going to look at the parts of a tree and the functions of a tree, and then we'll actually get into identifying some different types of trees. So hopefully during this unit, those of you who are cohort A or B will get outside and we'll start looking at some different types of trees and help you to be able to identify those. So I will talk to you next time.